Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The weeks following the courtroom victory had been quiet for Ada, but peace felt more like a pause than a reward. Though she had won the battle against Linda, the emotional toll weighed heavier than any public accolade. Her company, Ada Loaf, was still reeling from the sabotage. Investors were cautious, and internal morale was shaky. Amid rebuilding and frequent inspections of damaged branches, a new face appeared in her life. Raymond Kalu, a charismatic business consultant who was introduced through a former supplier. He had a calm demeanor, warm brown eyes, and the kind of voice that made people believe he was born to solve problems. His arrival came with recommendations and testimonies that felt too perfect, but Ada, tired and overwhelmed, gave him a polite nod instead of her usual skepticism. She had learned to be careful with trust, but Raymond never pushed. He simply offered to help quietly, and that was his weapon. Raymond didn't barge into her business like most investors did. He took his time, offering free insights, pulling out reports she didn't know he had access to, and pointing out silent losses in overlooked branches. When a client threatened legal action due to a bad delivery, Raymond stepped in and negotiated a settlement that protected both Ada's finances and reputation. Each time something went wrong, he had a smooth, easy fix, and each fix made him look more like a savior. Ada remained guarded, but she couldn't deny the peace that settled into her chest every time he showed up. He didn't gloat, didn't ask for attention. He simply fixed things and vanished like a storm whisperer. Slowly, Ada found herself expecting his calls, listening more attentively to his advice, and assigning him tasks beyond what she'd intended. She didn't want to admit she was beginning to rely on him, but it showed in her softening tone and the small smile that played on her lips whenever his name appeared on her phone. It wasn't love yet. It was relief. After all her years of clawing her way through betrayals and public humiliation, Ada was tired of being the strong one. For the first time, someone else seemed to take responsibility without taking control. At least, that's how it appeared. Her friends noticed the subtle shift in her mood. Even her longtime lawyer, Felix, hinted that she seemed distracted. Ada brushed it off. She told herself Raymond was just a professional contact. But deep inside, buried beneath her logic and ambition, was a young woman who had never really known what it meant to be loved without conditions. And Raymond's kindness, so timely, so precise, began to feel like the very thing she never allowed herself to wish for. Trouble came dressed in small packages, bags of flour that turned moldy before expiry, large orders that were misrouted, and customer complaints that grew in pattern across distant locations. Ada was furious. She doubled her internal reviews and questioned department heads, but found no consistent link. Just unfortunate mistakes. Raymond, as always, stepped in like a knight on call. He analyzed vendor contracts, discovered a fraudulent supplier connection, and even helped expose 2 dishonest managers. Each time he did, he wore humility like a badge, refusing credit and deflecting praise. He never claimed he saved the day, but every staff member knew he had. Ada began giving him more authority, first over logistics, then procurement, then marketing strategy. He never asked for power, but her trust handed it to him piece by piece. Despite the cracks, Ada remained sharp. She installed new tracking systems and changed suppliers, but each branch that was fixed seemed to give way to another problem elsewhere. It was like putting out fires while blindfolded. Raymond never let her feel alone. He drove across the country, inspecting branches himself. He sent her morning motivational quotes and nighttime check-ins. He even brought her dinner when she forgot to eat, a gesture no man had ever made for her. What truly disarmed her was how he never tried to talk about her past or trauma. He respected her silence. And Ada used men who were either too curious or too transactional, found his restraint intoxicating. His presence became her coping mechanism, a drug she didn't know she was getting addicted to. And the more she leaned on him, the deeper he embedded himself into the veins of her company. One morning, as she sat reviewing financial projections in her home office, Raymond arrived unannounced, with 2 boxes of branded t-shirts, a mock-up for a bakery relaunch campaign, and a soft smile that said, "You're not alone." It melted something inside her. For the first time, she laughed, a real laugh. The kind that left her teary-eyed. He said nothing, just sat across from her and waited until she caught her breath. Then he spoke gently, "Let's fix this, all of it." And in that moment, Ada began to believe. Not in men, not in luck, but in the possibility that maybe, just maybe, her survival had led her here for something good. Raymond's magic reached its peak when he secured the return of a major supermarket chain that had previously severed ties with Ada Loaf. It had taken months of failed emails and rejected proposals, but Raymond, through a back-channel negotiation, revived the deal. The joy on Ada's face was indescribable. She cried alone in her car after the meeting, and when she returned to the office, Raymond was there, waiting, leaning on her desk with 2 cups of palm wine and that familiar soft grin. "For victory," he said. That night, he didn't leave immediately. They sat in her office, the windows open to the Lagos breeze, and talked about life, about fear, about pain. She told him about selling bread barefoot, about the day Linda mocked her in public, about her mother, who had died too early to see her daughter rise. Raymond listened with a sincerity Ada had never seen in a man. After that night, something shifted between them. Ada started avoiding his eyes, feeling too exposed. Raymond remained the same, gentle, helpful, patient. But she was changing. Her strength had always been her ability to focus on work, to block emotions, to bury softness under spreadsheets and strategy. But now, her guard was crumbling. One morning, she found herself staring at a tie he had left on her chair, wondering what it would feel like to lean her head on his chest. Ada scolded herself. Love had never been her weakness. It was a luxury she couldn't afford. But Raymond wasn't asking her to fall. He was simply there. And that made the fall feel safe. She didn't know, couldn't know, that the same man who held her hand through darkness was also the one dimming the lights behind the scenes. That the sweet rescues were rehearsed traps, that the meetings he attended were chess moves on a game board she didn't know she was on. To Ada, Raymond was the man who smelled like hope. But in truth, he was the storm brewing behind the sunrise, and every step she took closer to him, she took further from safety. Raymond sat across from Linda in a dimly lit lounge bar far from the city center. His charm was no longer just an instrument. It had become a weapon. He spoke in measured tones, calculating each word as he unfolded a subtle yet sinister plan. "I told you I'd get close to her," he said with a smirk, sipping his drink. Linda's eyes narrowed. She hadn't seen Ada in days, but heard through whispers that Ada had started trusting Raymond deeply. "You wanted her distracted." "I wanted her company," he added, leaning forward. Linda felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had played dirty with Ada, sabotaging her business, twisting public opinion, but she never envisioned seeing Ada broken, let alone dead. There was something too cold in Raymond's eyes, too precise. He was different from her. Her bitterness came from pain and jealousy. His came from greed and power. She leaned back silently, unsure how to respond. She had never liked Ada, but murder? That wasn't the game she signed up for. Back at the company, Ada felt like the air was beginning to clear. She was beginning to smile again, even if it was fragile. Raymond's presence soothed her in a way she couldn't explain. He seemed to always show up just when she was at her worst, always saying the right thing, always knowing what needed to be done. When her bakery branch in Enugu reported a flour shortage that almost ruined a major contract, Raymond came up with a solution overnight. He even drove down with her to inspect the warehouse personally. What Ada didn't know was that the shortage had been orchestrated. The supplier was a ghost company created and funded by Raymond's proxies, and the resupply came at inflated prices that Ada unknowingly signed off on. Each heroic gesture by Raymond was a chess move, part of a game she hadn't yet realized she was playing. He studied her weakness, not the company, but her heart. She was a woman who had always fought alone, and now, for the first time, someone stood beside her. She was starting to believe in forever. Meanwhile, Linda returned to her apartment and paced for hours. She had initially celebrated Ada's fall, But Raymond's hunger for full control unsettled her. In her quiet moments, memories returned, nights when she and Ada shared soap Gary while dreaming about bread ovens they could never afford. Ada's strength had always been her vulnerability. She gave too much, too deeply, and trusted too fast when her heart was involved. Linda knew she had betrayed that trust once. But Raymond was planning something far worse. She began collecting files from old dealings, pulling up contacts and tracing Raymond's financial links. She didn't want to confront Ada just yet. It was too soon, and she wasn't sure Ada would believe her. But the storm was coming. And for the first time, Linda was no longer amused by watching Ada break. She was terrified. Linda sat in her office, staring at Ada through the glass partition. Ada looked calm, happy even. She was discussing a promotional event with the design team. Raymond stood beside her, whispering something that made her laugh. It was the kind of laugh Linda hadn't heard from Ada since they were teens. But all Linda could feel was dread. That morning, she had gotten a message from one of her past logistics contacts, a burner transaction that linked Raymond to the fire that destroyed the Owerri branch. She couldn't believe her eyes. She wanted to storm into the office and scream the truth, but something held her back. If she accused Raymond without proof, she'd be seen as bitter again, maybe even jealous. No one would believe her, not even Ada, and the betrayal of trust between them was still too fresh. So she chose silence. But it was a silence heavy with fear, and her heart raced every time Raymond smiled. Raymond had noticed Linda's distant stares. He didn't trust her, and he didn't have to. She had served her purpose. Her rivalry with Ada made his entrance easier, and now he was steps away from owning the business. But he was cautious. He knew that Linda was shrewd beneath her fall-from-grace demeanor. So he gave her breadcrumbs, small tokens of praise, a few high-level meetings, even a company car. He wanted to keep her neutralized. Meanwhile, he began quietly replacing key employees loyal to Ada with people from his circle. A fake HR agency run by his cousin began providing new consultants, all designed to make the company slowly dependent on him. Ada noticed the changes, but believed Raymond was streamlining things for her. She had no idea he was rebuilding her empire from the inside, brick by brick, under his name. Late one evening, Linda approached Ada as they were both exiting the building. She hesitated, but finally said, "You need to be careful with Raymond. Not everything he says is truth." Ada looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice calm but guarded. "Just don't give him everything," Linda said, walking away. Ada stood frozen for a moment. She hadn't expected Linda to be the one giving warnings. That night, she lay in bed turning the words over in her head. She wanted to believe the best about Raymond, but doubts began to creep in. Still, love had already blinded her once, and she wasn't ready to see clearly yet. It was past midnight when Ada found herself curled up in her office chair, overwhelmed. The latest sales reports from the Abuja branch were disheartening. Another delivery mix-up. Another cancellation. Her empire, the one she built from street bread to national franchise, was bleeding. And yet, right when she felt like falling apart, Raymond walked in with a flask of hot tea and a bag of suya. "You forgot to eat again," he said with a half-smile, setting the food beside her. "You don't have to keep saving me," she muttered, her voice thick with emotion. "Who says I'm saving you?" he said softly. "Maybe I'm just watching over someone I care about." The silence that followed was thick. Then, without warning, he kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that didn't ask permission, but felt like it had been waiting for months. Ada didn't resist. For the first time in years, she allowed her heart to lead. The kiss broke the last bit of caution she had. From that moment on, Ada began to trust Raymond not just with the business, but with her dreams, her fears, her late-night thoughts. She opened up about her struggles, her loneliness, and the betrayal that had once nearly destroyed her. Raymond listened, absorbing every word. But behind each "I understand" was a mind plotting how to use her vulnerability as leverage. He played his part well, the perfect listener, the supportive partner, the patient lover. And in return, Ada gave him access to every inch of her life. Soon, he had partial keys to boardroom decisions, warehouse oversight, and even access to the company's new expansion budget. He never pushed too fast, always waiting for her to offer it willingly. And she did, thinking this was what love finally looked like. But somewhere in the corners of her soul, Ada still felt unease. She couldn't name it, and she was too tired to question it. After all, Raymond had been the only one consistently there, through every crisis, every collapse. He was her refuge now. And when he whispered one night, "Let's build everything together," not just business a future, Ada's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever asked her that. She said yes before her mind could even process the weight of the promise. And so, she leaned fully into a man who had mastered the art of deceit, unaware that the kiss that cracked her guard would be the one that nearly killed her. It began with whispers and flickering lights, little things that seemed like coincidences, but slowly formed a pattern Ada could no longer ignore. The first bakery to suffer was the Abaddon branch, where power failures mysteriously fried the newly installed ovens. A week later, a delivery truck meant for the Lagos wholesale market was rerouted to a false address, costing them not just time, but credibility. And then came the worst. In a span of just 12 days, 3 of her oldest and most reputable branches, Enugu, Asaba, and Port Harcourt, were either burnt, robbed, or suddenly declared unfit by local authorities who cited mysterious health code violations. Ada's heart grew heavier with every report. She was no stranger to pressure, but this wasn't normal. It felt strategic. Still, she leaned further into Raymond's arms, clinging to his calm assurance that he'd look into it. He always had an answer, always arrived just in time, always carried a folder of solutions. It was enough to blind her. Raymond had perfected the art of controlled chaos. Every fire was his doing, every failure his orchestration. Yet, to Ada, he was her rescuer. In meetings, he gently suggested they consolidate operations and close down underperforming branches. She nodded grateful. When customers began complaining online about strange bread quality, he created a digital team overnight to handle PR, not knowing it was his team that planted the complaints in the first place. Even staff resignations, which Ada initially thought were out of burnout, were part of his manipulation. He'd offered them higher pay elsewhere through a proxy HR agency. One by one, her trusted employees were replaced by his agents. He never asked for full control outright. That was too obvious. He simply waited until she grew exhausted, vulnerable, and in need of help. Then he offered his hand with a smile. He was the poison and the antidote. Linda, on the other hand, watched it all unfold from a distance. She had grown quieter, but more observant. She knew Raymond was orchestrating something sinister, but she also knew Ada wouldn't listen. Not now, not while she was in love. Every time she tried to drop a hint, Ada would respond with a distant smile and phrases like, "Raymond is handling it," or "He's got it covered." Linda felt torn between her old bitterness and a strange guilt that weighed on her heart. She had once tried to ruin Ada for revenge, but she never wanted her dead, never wanted to see her reduced to a puppet. She started collecting documents, screenshots, email trails, small pieces of a puzzle she hoped she'd never need to put together. Raymond had gone too far, but timing was everything, and Linda knew the moment to speak hadn't yet arrived. Ada sat alone in the boardroom, her eyes locked on the financial report in front of her. Her fingers trembled. The bakery was bleeding. Income had dropped by over 45% in just 2 months. Branches that once brought in steady income were now liabilities. Every day brought a new emergency, and every solution brought her closer to dependency on Raymond. She looked around at the empty chairs, remembering when the room used to be filled with laughter, ambition, and purpose. Now it was cold and quiet. She picked up her phone to call one of her old managers, only to remember he'd resigned just last week. Her heart ached. She'd built this empire from crumbs and hustle, fought mockery and sabotage, survived betrayal and lawsuits. But now she was drowning, and didn't even know where the water was coming from. Her scream was silent, buried behind a forced smile she wore each time Raymond entered. That evening, Raymond walked in with a bouquet of flowers and a thick folder. "Let's talk about the future," he said, his voice smooth like honey. Inside the folder was a proposal, a merger. "It's not about me taking over," he said. "It's about protecting what you've built." You and I together. Business. Life. Everything. He reached out and touched her hand gently. This isn't just about bread, Ada. It's about legacy. She looked into his eyes and saw certainty, saw a future she had dreamed of but never allowed herself to believe in. She had never been married, never had a real partner. She always told herself she didn't need a man, but in truth, she had longed for someone who saw her worth beyond the business. Raymond knew that. He had studied her long enough to find the cracks. She whispered a soft, "I'll think about it," not knowing she'd already made her decision. Later that night, Ada stood in front of her bathroom mirror, still holding the contract Raymond gave her. She traced her reflection with tired eyes, eyes that once sparkled with ambition, now dulled by exhaustion. In her mind, she heard her mother's voice. "Don't let anyone own your bread, Ada. Not even love." She placed the contract down on the sink and splashed water on her face, trying to drown the uncertainty. She didn't want to be weak, but she also didn't want to die alone, and Raymond had filled every void she never admitted she had. The silent war within her raged. Was this love? Or had desperation disguised itself as hope again? Her heart didn't answer. It only whispered a prayer. "God, please let me be right this time." The office was quiet the next morning when Ada walked in with a signed merger contract tucked in her handbag. Her steps felt heavy, her thoughts conflicted. She had stayed up all night reading and rereading the document. It granted Raymond partial ownership, a significant stake, enough to influence key decisions, though not complete control. But it was more than just the company. It was symbolic. It was her saying yes to the man who had saved her countless times, who made her laugh again, who had promised a future that didn't require her to carry the world alone. She told herself she was doing it to save the business, that she still held the reins. But her soul knew better. Somewhere inside, she felt herself letting go, not of the company, but of the part of her that had vowed to never be owned. Raymond was already in the conference room, sipping coffee and talking to a few of his new hires. They smiled too much, laughed too easily. Ada couldn't help but feel like an outsider in her own boardroom. But when he turned and saw her, everything else faded. He walked over, took the folder from her, and kissed her forehead. "You've made the right choice," he said, signing beside her name. The sound of the pen scratching paper was louder than thunder. It wasn't just ink, it was a transfer of power, of trust, of control. Raymond's eyes gleamed, not with love, but victory. But Ada, blinded by the joy of finally having someone who chose her, didn't see it. She smiled and whispered, "Now we're really partners." Linda heard about the signing 2 days later from one of the old staff members she still had ties with. She sat in her kitchen, gripping her phone with shaking hands. Her heart sank. "She signed," she whispered. Oh God, she really signed. The documents Raymond had been hiding were still in her possession, but she hadn't yet dared to use them. She had hoped Ada would figure things out before it was too late. Now, it seemed the trap had closed. She didn't know what Raymond's final move was, but she could feel it, the cold sharpness of it approaching. She wanted to send a message, scream a warning. But how do you save someone who's in love with the one holding the knife? Ada walked into Raymond's study late one afternoon after he left for a supposed supplier meeting. She wasn't the snooping type, but something inside her, something quiet but persistent, had begun whispering warnings she couldn't ignore. At first, she just wanted to grab one of his printed supplier lists to double-check a name that didn't sit right with her. But as she opened his bottom drawer, her hand brushed against a folder with her bakery's logo. Only this one wasn't part of any known documentation. Inside were signed reports, audit forms, and legal drafts, many of which looked manipulated. There were company stamps on some and fake signatures on others. A lump formed in her throat. She flipped through them, her breathing growing shaky. Most concerning of all was a letter from a corporate bank account detailing stock transfers she didn't authorize. But still, she held back. Maybe it was a mix-up. Maybe Raymond was just helping behind the scenes, trying to streamline things. Maybe. The word haunted her. Later that night, Raymond returned and found Ada quiet, withdrawn. She didn't confront him, nor did she mention the folder. Instead, she handed him a glass of Zobo and said nothing about the anxiety pulling at her insides. He smiled, kissed her on the cheek, and said, "You're stressed. Let me handle things." That was the problem. He was handling things. Too many things. Every time something went wrong, he already had a solution. And every time she was too tired to fight, he came bearing roses and contracts. The cracks in her spirit were starting to widen, but she still refused to believe this man, who had comforted her, held her at night, stood beside her in public, could be orchestrating her ruin. She sat at the edge of her bed that night, holding the documents tightly against her chest. She didn't cry. She just stared into the dark and whispered, "Please let it not be true." In the following days, Ada tried to act normal. The bakery's 10th anniversary was approaching, and preparations were in full swing. It was going to be a televised event, an emotional comeback for her business after months of setbacks. The venue was set, the staff were buzzing, and even social media was anticipating her speech. But beneath her excitement was a trembling fear. Raymond had insisted on handling the catering team and all food and drinks, claiming he wanted to surprise her. Linda, who had been distant but watchful, heard of this and nearly panicked. She reached out anonymously to Felix, Ada's trusted lawyer, urging him to monitor Raymond closely. She didn't know exactly what he had planned, but her instincts told her that Ada's life might truly be in danger this time, not just her business. Felix had barely slept in 3 days. The anonymous call from Linda hadn't surprised him. He knew she still felt responsible for how vulnerable Ada had become. But when she told him that Raymond had access to every branch and had quietly replaced most key managers, he sprang into action. His first step was a quiet audit of Raymond's accounts. What he uncovered stunned him. There were links between Raymond and a shell company that had supplied faulty flour to several of Ada's bakeries. Further investigation revealed that the company didn't even exist 5 months ago. Even more disturbing, the warehouse where the flour was stored had caught fire mysteriously, one of the 3 that had accidentally burned down. Felix dug deeper and traced transfers from Raymond's account to foreign holdings, funds possibly meant to drain the bakery's accounts slowly over time. It was enough to make Felix's heart pound. The plan wasn't just to take Ada's business. Raymond was building a new empire with her assets. Felix called Ada immediately, but she didn't pick up. She was in dress rehearsal for her bakery's anniversary event. He sent her a message instead, warning her cryptically, "Check Raymond's company records. And don't eat or drink anything you don't prepare yourself." But Ada didn't read it in time. She was surrounded by staff, photographers, and journalists. Raymond was charming the crowd, managing the logistics, giving orders, making speeches, a perfect image of a loving partner and devoted business ally. Ada watched him from the side of the stage, her expression soft but unreadable. Something in her chest felt heavy, but she dismissed it as exhaustion. She had been sleeping less, worrying more. Maybe her anxiety was just making things worse. Still, she made a mental note to look into the message from Felix once the event was over. Meanwhile, Linda paced in her apartment, feeling a rising unease she couldn't shake. She had warned Felix. But should she have warned Ada directly? Would Ada even believe her? There was still pride in their dynamic. And even though Linda had come to care again in a strange, twisted way, she wasn't sure Ada would welcome her voice. And so she did the only thing she could. She left one final voicemail, her voice trembling as she said, "I know we're past talking, Ada, but something is wrong. Raymond is not who he says he is. Please, just be careful today. Please." She ended the call with tears streaming down her face. She didn't know it yet, but she had just made the most important call of Ada's life. The event was magnificent. A sleek banquet hall glittered under soft lights, and the backdrop bore the golden words, 10 years of bread, 10 years of grace. Ada stepped onto the stage in a shimmering rose gold gown, her hair pulled into an elegant bun, her smile delicate and composed. The crowd cheered, and flashes of cameras lit up the room. She looked radiant, not just because of her outfit, but because she had come so far from the days of street-side bread hawking. Raymond stood beside her, clapping proudly, his arm brushing against her waist. He had made sure she drank water beforehand, offered by his assistant, a young man Ada didn't recognize but smiled politely at. The program moved on. Speeches were given. A documentary of her journey played across a large screen. Ada wiped away a tear, clutching the microphone as the applause thundered. But then something shifted. As Ada walked back to her seat, her vision blurred. Her chest tightened. The room spun slightly, and a sudden, sharp pain stabbed through her stomach. She staggered forward, her hand clutching her midsection. A murmur swept across the crowd. Raymond rushed toward her, but before he reached her, Ada collapsed, the microphone falling with a loud thud as gasps and screams filled the hall. Her staff gathered around her. Raymond shouted for help, pretending to panic, while his assistant quietly slipped out of the venue. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, and Ada was rushed into an ambulance. Her pulse was faint. She was barely breathing. The news spread like wildfire. Bread Queen collapses live on stage. Social media exploded with videos, speculations, and concern. At the hospital, doctors fought to stabilize her, discovering traces of a rare toxin in her system, enough to kill if it had remained untreated. Felix, who had been watching the event live from his office, immediately called emergency contacts and rushed to the hospital. But Raymond was gone, disappeared, his phone off, his office empty. Felix's suspicion turned to certainty. And Linda, watching the chaos unfold on her TV, collapsed into a chair, shaking her head. "I was too late," she whispered. But she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The sun was barely rising when Linda arrived at the television station uninvited, without makeup, her clothes disheveled, and her face weary from tears. The receptionist nearly turned her away until Linda whispered the name Raymond and said she had evidence about what happened to Ada. Minutes later, a news director pulled her into a private room. Cameras began to roll. For the first time in her life, Linda spoke not for herself, but for someone else. Her voice shook as she confessed that she once tried to destroy Ada, but never to kill her. She explained how she met Raymond, how he had once approached her under the guise of partnership, but revealed his deeper intentions, to completely own Ada's bakery empire, to absorb it, and erase her from the legacy she had built. As the world watched, Linda shared screenshots, voice recordings, and even photographs. "I didn't plan to come here," she said, wiping her eyes. "But when I saw Ada collapse, I knew I had gone too far by staying silent." She played a clip of Raymond discussing his plans to take her name and her fame, laughing with a woman at a club. The footage wasn't pristine, but it was damning. She displayed signed delivery logs from fake flower suppliers, invoices Raymond created using her own name as a decoy, and proof of offshore accounts he used to siphon money from several branches. The hosts were stunned. Viewers flooded the comment sections. For the first time, Linda wasn't seen as a villain. She was seen as a broken friend trying to make something right. Later that day, news outlets scrambled to contact her. Some praised her bravery. Others questioned her timing. But Linda didn't care. She had spent so long fighting Ada, trying to be better than her, that she didn't realize how far their war had gone. She never wanted Ada dead. Even when she tried to ruin her brand, it was born out of jealousy and pride, not a thirst for blood. Now, watching Ada fight for her life in a hospital bed because of a man they both had trusted at different times, it broke something inside her. She returned home and turned off her phone. All she could do now was pray Ada survived. And if she did, Linda knew she would accept the consequences of her own silence. But at least the world now knew who Raymond really was. Felix stormed into the hospital later that afternoon with a briefcase full of documents and a laptop clutched under his arm. Ada was still unconscious, hooked to IVs and machines, her breathing shallow but stable. Doctors confirmed she had been poisoned, slowly, over time, with doses so subtle they wouldn't have triggered early alarms. Felix's face hardened with guilt. He had warned her, but too late. He walked out of her room and into the waiting lounge where several of her loyal staff had gathered, along with police investigators. Without wasting time, Felix opened his laptop, plugged in a USB, and laid out a full digital presentation. It included fake supplier registration documents, doctored audits, manipulated emails, all linking back to Raymond. The investigators watched in disbelief. Raymond Ease, Felix began, is not just a fraud. He's a predator. He builds fake companies, lures female CEOs into partnerships, siphons funds, and vanishes before they realize what happened. He laid down documents showing Raymond had done similar things in Ghana and South Africa under aliases. But Ada was different because she loved him. That love had given him access like never before. Felix showed how Raymond orchestrated every crisis in Ada's company. The faulty flour, the branch fires, the labor strikes. He even showed proof that Raymond had hired a small-time chemist to lace Ada's water with slow-reacting toxins. He planned to marry her, eliminate her, and inherit the brand, Felix said. He didn't just want to ruin her. He wanted to become her. By the end of the meeting, a full manhunt had begun. Raymond's accounts were frozen. His passport was flagged. Border alerts were issued across West Africa. But Felix didn't feel satisfied. He walked back into Ada's hospital room, knelt beside her, and whispered, "I'm so sorry. You trusted him, and I failed you." As he held her hand gently, Ada stirred for the first time in hours. Her eyelids fluttered. She looked pale and weak, but her lips moved faintly. Felix leaned closer. "Did he do this?" she whispered. Her voice was like wind through broken glass. Felix nodded, eyes glistening. "Yes, but we stopped him. Linda helped. You're safe now." Ada closed her eyes again, tears slipping down her cheeks. In that moment, pain, betrayal, and survival clung to her body like a second skin. She had survived, but she would never be the same again. The next morning, Ada sat up in bed, her body weak, but her mind razor sharp. The betrayal had cracked something inside her that no storm ever could. Raymond, who kissed her forehead, held her when she cried, promised her forever, was a monster wearing a mask. The thought of it made her physically ill. She remembered every moment they spent together. His warm glances, his thoughtful gifts, the way he defended her in meetings. Every act of love was just manipulation. She asked Felix to hand her a notepad and began writing down names, every branch manager, supplier, assistant Raymond had hired or recommended. "We start cleaning house," she said with a hollow voice. She was done being the helpless victim. Hours later, the news broke. Raymond had been captured at a private airstrip just outside Port Harcourt. His car had been packed with fake passports, documents, and cash. When arrested, he laughed and said, "Tell Ada I almost had her." The footage of his arrest made it to the evening news. Ada didn't cry. She didn't even speak. She just watched, her eyes cold and unreadable. That night, Felix returned with legal documents. Ada's signature had been forged on multiple contracts that would have handed over controlling interest of her company had she died. It was all part of Raymond's blueprint. Felix assured her that with the new evidence and Linda's public statement, the courts would rule in her favor. She nodded, but her silence spoke louder than victory. Ada finally broke when she was alone. She clutched her bedsheet and sobbed until her voice was hoarse. "Why is it always love that betrays me?" she whispered. First Linda, then Raymond. Every time she opened her heart, it became a weapon against her. The nurse came in with her dinner tray and paused. "You're stronger than you think, Ma," she said softly, then left. Ada stared at the untouched food. That night, she made a vow. No man, no matter how charming, would ever stand between her and her purpose again. Not with fake smiles. Not with poison. And definitely not with a ring. The courtroom was overflowing. Journalists scrambled for front row seats, and live streams flooded social media platforms across the country. This wasn't just a business scandal. It had become a national headline. The poisoned bread queen. Ada entered the court silently, supported by her assistant and Felix. Her frame was lighter, her eyes sunken, yet her presence was powerful. Like a warrior walking into a battlefield where she had already died once, but returned to finish the war. Raymond was escorted in next, his smile arrogant, dressed in a crisp black suit as if it were a business meeting, not a criminal trial. When their eyes met, something dark and dangerous passed between them. Ada looked away first, but it wasn't fear. It was exhaustion. The prosecutor read the charges, attempted murder, financial sabotage, forgery, embezzlement, and corporate conspiracy. Raymond pled guilty to forgery and financial misconduct, but denied poisoning Ada. He spun tales of love gone sour, claiming that Ada had planted evidence to frame him when he refused to marry her. The courtroom murmured as he continued, calm and convincing, painting himself as the victim. But Felix had come prepared. He introduced documents showing siphoned funds from multiple branches, money funneled to dummy accounts under Raymond's name. He presented recordings from Linda's confession and secret voice notes from Raymond's own phone, where he laughed about Ada's collapse. The judge's expression tightened. Ada didn't speak throughout the hearing, not once. Her silence was louder than any argument. Every time Raymond tried to speak about her, she simply stared at the wall, her hands folded tightly in her lap. What hurt her the most wasn't the money or the poisoning. It was the betrayal of intimacy. That someone she had dared to love had mapped her destruction with precision. When the ruling came in, Raymond was sentenced to 25 years in prison with no chance of early parole. His face finally fell as he realized the game was over. Reporters tried to speak to Ada on her way out, but she waved them off. When someone shouted, "Do you feel vindicated?" she paused at the courthouse steps. "No," she whispered. "I feel tired." And with that, she walked away, not with fanfare, but with a dignity that silence alone could deliver. 2 weeks later, a handwritten envelope arrived at Ada's doorstep with no return address. The handwriting was unmistakably Linda's, round, careful, almost apologetic in itself. Ada held the note in her hands for a long time before opening it. She sat by the window, sunlight streaming across her bandaged wrist, and read the short letter. "Dear Ada, I never wanted you dead. I know you'll never believe me, and maybe I don't deserve for you to. I was bitter, broken, and stupid. I wanted to beat you, not bury you. Raymond scared me more than I'll admit to anyone else. I thought he'd go after me next if I spoke too soon. That's not an excuse, just the coward's truth. I saw what you built and how hard you held it together even while bleeding. You didn't deserve what he did, and I didn't deserve your kindness. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know, I remember who you were before all of this. And I wish I had stayed that girl who once laughed with you at midnight. Linda." Ada didn't cry, at least not right away. She folded the letter neatly, placed it in her drawer beside other unreadable moments of her life, her late mother's hospital bill, the bakery's first license approval, and a faded photograph of herself and Linda at 17, grinning over a loaf of half-baked bread. The past no longer hurt her the way it once did, but it did still weigh. She never expected an apology from Linda. She had learned not to expect anything anymore. But something about the letter felt human, not strategic, not manipulative. Just a tired woman who had seen too much and finally stopped running from her own shadow. It didn't undo what happened, but it gave it meaning. In the days that followed, Ada visited her bakery branches quietly, hugging old staff, checking ovens, reviewing new training policies. The name Ada's Crust still stood proudly across billboards, but the face behind it had changed. Her silence became part of her story, something people respected even more than her survival. She no longer tried to defend herself online. She simply lived. One morning, as she held a fresh batch of soft, golden rolls in her palms, she whispered, "I forgive you, Linda, but I don't forget." Then she placed the bread gently on the shelf and moved on. Linda was living quietly in a small rural village when Ada arrived, dressed in a simple brown kaftan with sandals and no entourage. She walked through the dusty bakery compound where Linda now volunteered, teaching young girls how to make bread from scratch. It was quiet except for the sounds of laughter and kneading dough. Linda froze when she saw Ada. Her hands were coated with flour, and her heart raced. She didn't know if she should run, cry, or kneel. But Ada simply walked up to her, looked her in the eye, and said, "You've taught them well." That was all. No dramatic confrontation. No poetic justice. Just two women who had lost and survived. They sat under a mango tree behind the bakery, each holding a loaf of fresh bread like it was a piece of their past. Ada listened as Linda spoke, not in defense, but in reflection. She admitted how she had loved their friendship, but didn't know how to live in someone else's shadow. How jealousy slowly replaced admiration. How she thought stealing Ada's reputation would finally make her feel worthy. "I broke myself to break you," she said, her voice cracking. Ada nodded slowly, then offered her a bottle of water. They didn't cry or hug. The past had drained their emotions dry. But in the silence between them was an understanding. Neither of them won, but both of them survived. As Ada stood to leave, Linda asked, "Do you ever smile now?" Ada turned, her eyes soft. "I do, but not the same way." She reached into her bag and handed Linda a small wrapped parcel. Inside was one of Ada's newest bread training manuals, with a personal note on the first page, "For the girl who once baked dreams with me." Linda clutched the book to her chest. As Ada walked back to her car, the girls inside the bakery ran to hug her, calling her Auntie Ada. She smiled for them, for the future, for something bigger than pain. For the first time, she wasn't trying to heal from the past. She was walking straight into her peace. The rainy season had just begun. The bakery was quieter in the early mornings, with the aroma of freshly baked bread dancing in the cold mist. Ada had begun to enjoy these silences, sitting in her office with a cup of tea, watching the sunrise over the horizon. She didn't expect visitors anymore, and she had stopped checking her phone for sweet messages that once made her smile. Her life had become a quiet rhythm of healing and rebuilding, until one Friday morning when there was a soft knock at her gate. It was a man she didn't recognize, tall, calm, and dressed in a plain Ankara shirt with flower on his sleeves. He introduced himself simply as Keen, a baker from the East who had followed Ada's story in the newspapers and wanted to train under her guidance. At first, she didn't believe him. Keen's approach was different. He didn't compliment her. He didn't flatter her pain or act as if he was sent by destiny. He worked. Day after day, he showed up at the training center, rolling dough, cleaning ovens, offering ideas with humility. Ada observed him silently. He was younger, but his eyes carried something deep, like someone who had also lost something precious. They rarely spoke outside work, but she started noticing the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. It wasn't lust or admiration. It was respect. That made her afraid. She had built walls so high she didn't realize how lonely the fortress had become. She was cautious, but Keen's presence felt warm, not threatening. He didn't try to rescue her. He just stayed. One evening, as they sat at the back of the training center watching students pack their loaves, Keen said quietly, "You're strong, Ada. But even strong people need someone to lean on." She looked at him, unsure whether to cry or laugh. "The last person I leaned on nearly ended me," she whispered. "Then maybe it wasn't leaning, it was falling," Keen replied. For the first time in a long time, she smiled, not the public smile, not the businesswoman's grin, but the soft, shy one she thought she had lost. They continued sitting in silence. She didn't know where this would go, and for once she was okay not knowing. Love, she now understood, wasn't about rescuing or controlling. It was about choosing peace. But even peace, she knew, came with its own risks. Months later, on the exact date Ada's company once collapsed under betrayal, she launched her newest legacy project, the Crust Foundation Training Institute, a center where widows, single mothers, and former prison inmates were trained in bread making, business skills, and personal growth. It wasn't a flashy launch. There were no celebrities or politicians, just women who had suffered, survived, and now smiled with confidence. Ada stood on a small stage, wearing a simple white dress, her hair wrapped in a soft headscarf. Her voice was clear as she said, "This is for those who were mocked, for those who were left behind, for those who fed the world while starving inside." The applause was quiet, but deep. She had nothing left to prove, but everything left to give. Linda didn't attend the event, but she sent a box of hand-woven aprons made by her new students in the rural bakery she now ran. Inside was a small note, "You win, Ada. Not because I lost, but because you gave me the courage to start again." Ada smiled at the note and placed it inside the Institute's cornerstone, buried not to be forgotten, but to remind her of the ashes from which she had risen. Raymond's name was now nothing more than a footnote in her history. Felix had returned as her company's head legal consultant. And Keen, he remained by her side, not as a savior, not as a shadow, but as a steady flame beside her fire. They hadn't rushed anything. He never asked for control, never acted entitled. He asked only for presence, and Ada gave it. By the end of the year, Ada's story was no longer one of survival. It was one of transformation. She had once been a girl mocked for selling bread on the roadside. Then she was the woman nearly destroyed by love and jealousy. And now, she was the matriarch of a bread empire that fed bodies and healed souls. She looked in the mirror one morning and saw it, not just beauty or strength, but peace. A peace she earned through scars, betrayal, silence, and forgiveness. As she closed the door to her bakery that evening, a little girl ran up to her and asked, "Auntie Ada, how did you become this great?" She bent down, touched the girl's cheek, and said with a soft smile, "By never letting anyone turn my hunger into hate." Then she walked away, the sun setting behind her, her legacy just beginning. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.